Welcome to the Weird Interview Show. I'm a weird alien. Today I'm interviewing award-winning comedian Severin Gourley. Why did you want to be a comedian?
Um, that's a good question. Growing up, my parents were really good about showing me different kinds of comedy, different comedy shows, different comedians. And so I think early on, I was fascinated with people saying things that made people laugh. Because laughing is a very involuntary reaction that just kind of explodes out of people. And so, yeah, I remember being fascinated by that. And then, kind of as I grew older, I realized, oh, this is something you can do. You can just do comedy. And that was great. So I remember writing jokes for a couple of years before I ever went on stage because I wanted to be prepared to go up there and eventually plucked up the courage to sign up for an open mic. And then I remember getting a few laughs throughout the show, which was huge from something that I had written, like these thoughts that I had scribbled down, getting that reaction out of people. And then after the show, I knew that's what I wanted to do. The fact that I could write things, get that reaction out of people. I remember the MC of the open mic talking to me afterwards and being like, yep, that's the heroin. That's the drug. That's what kind of people are chasing. And I know I wanted to get that response again from people and really kind of pursue that as a thing.
What have been the biggest challenges when doing comedy?
One of the biggest challenges is mainly adapting to whatever the audience is. So every show, different audience, different group of people that laugh at different things, have different senses of humor. And so I think a lot of early on what you think stand up is you write out a set list, you have your jokes, you have them set in, and then you just perform that in front of people, which is something you can do, but then I've learned that sometimes you're not going to do the best. You're not going to be the best comedian for this group of people that has given up their time and often money to be there. And so a good example is on like a lineup show. Hopefully, you've got some comedians before you, so you can get a sense of what the audience laughs at. Do they like more dirty jokes? Do they like it clean? If somebody tells like a joke about politics or religion, does that get a good response? So some of the biggest challenges of stand-up is altering your set list on the fly, and maybe if there's a joke you really want to tell, putting that aside because you know that this one's going to get a better response from the audience. And even while performing, sometimes weird things happen in the room that you then have to respond to in a particular way and kind of address, or else people just think you're a robot kind of reciting lines.
When writing your material, how mindful of you of whether the material will be public friendly versus jokes you just want to do?
So this yeah ties into the last questions, which was more kind of performance based. So actually writing the material is an interesting one. I think you can tell jokes you want to tell and have them be public friendly. It's maybe that's the best. That's when they kind of both align. But especially early on, I wrote a few jokes and told a few jokes that were definitely up to the line of what audiences would kind of deem to be acceptable. And in my mind, it's always got to be a funnier joke than it is offensive, if that makes sense. And the more you do comedy, the more you kind of get that instinct. So it is something I'm very mindful of. And whenever I'm writing a joke, thinking, is this punching up, punching down? You've got that as an idea. Am I going after a group that has a certain amount of power, and so it's fine to kind of make fun of them? I never want to go after a group that doesn't have a lot of power because that just seems a bit weird to me. So yeah, it's always something kind of in the back of my mind when I'm writing material is who is the subject, which is why a lot of my material is very autobiographical because it's fine if I'm talking about myself being a weird, awkward boy, because then hopefully the audience kind of sees something of themselves in that.
Do you cover politics in your comedy and why or why not?
I do not. It's something I've kind of steered away from, and I think there are a few reasons. The first is I started doing comedy when I was 20. and I'm 27 now, and at both ages, you don't necessarily want to hear my opinions on politics. Because I would go on stage with like the really young kind of baby face, and then I felt like I was talking about these kind of big topics. People just be like, get off here, kid. Why stop preaching to us about politics? I feel like I hadn't really lived enough, and maybe still haven't, to justify talking about these big topics. It's also the idea that it's a gamble. You're always going to have people that disagree with you politically, and so you never want to turn off about sections of the audience, completely turn them off, completely get them against you by doing these topics. That being said, I think if you can do them generally enough, then you can kind of get away with it. And it again, it's going back to, is it funnier than somebody would be offended of it? If it's somebody that does a joke where they have a different politics to you, but then they put a spin on it and they make it kind of funny, then that's very worthwhile. And then just from a base level of the material, politics changes so much that there's always a certain shelf life to the material, that it's always something that's going to be relevant until it isn't, then the jokes stop working quite as much. So the little kind of politic kind of material that I did is, yeah, not jokes I can do now because they're just not relevant to the world, which is again why I try to write a lot about myself and my own life and awkward things that I've kind of noticed and kind of derive humor from that because that's very evergreen material in that kind of way.
Has there been any strange reactions to your jokes?
There've been a few. I can't think of any in particular necessarily, but something that does kind of make me pull my hair out and is both good and frustrating is when you're trying new material and a part of the joke that you thought was just a throwaway line, that's what gets the laugh. And then you have like kind of this punchline that doesn't quite live up to it. And then you just have to swap them around and think like, okay, this is the funny bit of the joke, is that you never quite know what people are going to laugh at. And it's always trying to negotiate that between what I find funny, what they find funny, and try to find that middle ground. And so, yeah, I'm always surprised by what audiences find funny. That's always so fascinating to me. And hopefully I can kind of write material that can reach those two. Or again, like adapt my material to what I think is going to hit.
How do you promote yourself?
This is something I've tried to kind of work on a bit more. So, of course, a lot of people view performing as like it's the arts and you just want to go on stage and tell jokes and that's enough. But especially with social media becoming more and more prevalent as the years go on, there is more of an emphasis on promoting yourself. And there are so many ways that you can promote yourself. So the best analogy I can make is that I use a shotgun approach to promoting myself. I have a Facebook page. I started a TikTok recently, as possibly cringy that could be, but it's just another place where you can kind of be seen. I should do more things on Instagram. And even just promoting a show I did recently down where I currently am in Christchurch. I posted to a couple of community pages that have like what's on in Christchurch. Put up some posters, did a bunch of posts on Facebook, told a bunch of people about the show. So it is just seeing how many different avenues you can promote yourself and how many different groups of people you can basically get eyeballs on your things and then hope that a good percentage of them is going to come to the show and is going to enjoy it.
What are some things about performing and writing comedy that would surprise people?
I would surprise people. Again, that's another good question. So in terms of performing, uh, I'd imagine people know that comedians can do very well. They can kill, murder, all of these very aggressive terms. And then they can also bomb or eat it on stage and get no laughs and just completely down their asses. And both can be good and bad for different reasons. If you do really well, it kind of puts a lot of pressure on the next set that you have, or you're always trying to find that high and reach that kind of pinnacle of it just being a fantastic show. If you bomb, it makes you question your life choices that led up to you doing stand-up. I always say, why couldn't I get into pottery? I feel like you can't bomb in pottery unless the kiln catches on fire. So it's going to be good and bad for different reasons, but I think it would surprise people that the middle ground between them can also be very frustrating. Is not necessarily doing well, but not doing badly, kind of having about a mid set and kind of getting some laughs, but then some other laughs, because you can't really gain anything from that. If you do really well, you can say, well, what went well? What did I do well in my performance? If you bomb, what went badly? What mistakes can I make? But those kind of middling sets, you can't really learn anything from. They're just kind of like putting putting in the time, going through the motions. And so I think that would surprise people a bit to think that comedians kind of doing a bit average is, at least for me, and I've also talked to some other comics about this, a kind of frustrating thing to happen. And then in terms of writing, it might surprise people just how many different writing styles, writing methods, processes that comedians have. I've always maintained there are as many different kinds of writing styles and ways to write comedy as there are comedians that do comedy. I've heard so many different people, ones that have notebooks, note app on the phone, a big page, a thing on the wall with post-it notes that they put. Talking to a comic who did that, and apparently there's a strong breeze which swept a lot of the material onto the street. You're just hoping that nobody picked it up and just was like, why does this post-it note say pig murder? Just completely out of context, seeing the material. So yeah, there are so many different ways that you can write comedy, and it's about finding the one that kind of works for you. And so I think just the breadth and the complexities and different ways that people write comedy would really surprise somebody if they kind of uh, did like a poll of comedians and kind of asked them in that way.
Who are your favorite comedians?
Oh, we could be here for hours. There's so many good ones right now. One that I've really connected with recently is Neil Brennan, who's a kind of US comic. I like a lot of US comedy. I think early on I started with some British comedy, and that I kind of liked, but my brain likes the very set up punchline of US comedians. So if gun to my head, my favorite one is Patton Oswalt, who is this kind of very storytelling, very kind of jovial US comic. Um, there are other kind of US comics that I've kind of watched for a while, like Jackie Cation, Laurie Kilmartin, who also both have a podcast together where they just talk about comedy and they just talk about doing that's called the Jackie and Laurie Show. Hopefully it's still going. I haven't listened to a bit. But that's a really good one to do. Pete Holmes is a comedian I've kind of loved for forever, basically for as long as I've been doing comedy. Um, and I think it's interesting. A lot of the comedians I like are either very similar to me or very different. So Pete Holmes is a very like emotive. He'll just yell on stage in a kind of fun way, very silly, but very enigmatic. And then there are comedians that are more kind of set up punchline, which is closer to kind of my style, like Dimitri Martin, Anthony Jeselnik, Dan Mintz, who are all very kind of writing and very tight, kind of writing in that way. So hopefully those are some people to check out if you haven't heard of them for your audience and enjoy.
How much work is organizing gigs?
Oh, it is so much work. It's something I've had to do a bit recently, especially around festivals. So I do the Wellington Fringe Festival a lot. I haven't done Comedy Fest yet, but that's definitely on my kind of bucket list. And you go into it thinking like, how much work could it be? You just contact a venue, get a show, market it, bim bam boom. But there are so many steps within those. Is sometimes venues will just not contact you back, or will only have these two dates weeks apart, and then you have to kind of see, do you want to do that? Do you want to contact a different venue? There's also, yeah, marketing, and again, so many different ways you can market a show and different places that you can put it, that I am floored by the comedians in the scene that organize and put on weekly shows or monthly shows and have to do that constantly, because even just doing a show that I did recently down here and organized and put on, called Music from an Alternate Universe, that was so much effort, and the venue did so much, and it was still took so much out of me. And then I've got doing that show in the Wellington Fringe in late February, and having to then go through the marketing of that. I'm already tired from it. So it is an unbelievable amount of work. And any producer of a particular comedy show, it's a very thankless job, and it is so much mahi that there's so much love kind of goes out to them for doing that.
Do you have any career aspirations?
Ooh, that's a good question. This is a very, where do I see myself in 5 years? Um, I would like to host a show. I think something that I really, when I was watching US comedians, of course, you'd see them do stand up, but you'd also see them on like late night shows. And so being the host of like a talk show, a late night show would be amazing. That would be, I'd be absolutely floored to do that. But I feel like you need a certain amount of street cred, a certain amount of marketing yourselves, and also living in Auckland. So, I mean, no dig to Auckland, but I live in Wellington and just absolutely love it there. So that would be a bit tough. But that would be, if I had to like do like the wave a magic wand, what would I want to do? It is probably that. But so far, I'm just happy writing comedy and really challenging myself as a performer, and to continue to evolve my own style. So a good example is I doing stand up, did my own like hour-ish kind of stand-up show called Hey, It's the Awkward Guy, based on something yelled at me in the street. And then the show I'm doing at the moment, Music from an Alternate Universe, is incorporating piano music into the show and still having it be kind of stand up, but then doing these piano pieces and kind of incorporating that. So I guess, yeah, my aspirations are to continue to do shows that I think are very me and very authentic to myself and my own sense of humor, and hope that that leads to either me carving out my own particular niche or joining these kind of already established projects, which are wonderful and out there. And I think we've got a really good, at least comedy industry in New Zealand. I would like to see expand maybe beyond Auckland, and a boy can dream.
You now do a musical comedy show. Is that more challenging than just doing stand-up, and in what ways if so?
It it has a I think there are different challenges to both, is the annoying answer that I'll have for this. A challenge early on. So the way the show kind of came about is I'd play silly piano tunes to kind of entertain myself and to kind of unwind. And then it was in the last maybe 5 or 6 months that I realized I can do this on stage, and people tend to like it because it is a very unique kind of thing to do, these instrumental piano versions of popular songs, and then kind of talk about them in a kind of stand-up way. And so I started doing them on kind of variety shows in Wellington, either variety or new material, a show that wasn't geared as specifically stand-up. And the challenge I found is, in stand-up, I'm very used to set up, punchline, getting, if I'm doing well, kind of consistent laughs for my material. And then I'd play a 2 or 3 minute piano piece and kind of not necessarily get freaked out, but kind of get unnerved midway through that I wasn't getting a reaction from the audience. And I was thinking, do they like it? Are they just kind of switching off? And then I realized that if they're a good crowd, they're listening and they're quiet and they're trying to listen to the different parts of the piece.
and then I'd get a very good response afterwards. Uh, and that would kind of settle me down. And so having to change my brain from stand-up brain to music brain uh, was definitely a challenge. Because music, you play like ba 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 da ba, ba, and then everyone's like clapping and laughing because they know that that's the cue to do that, which is a lot more difficult in stand-up. You have to really hit that punchline, be ba 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 ba, and then people know to laugh and clap. And so that was definitely a challenge. And then
Putting together the structure of the show was another big challenge, where in stand-up you have, here are my jokes about pets, here are my jokes about going to the mall, and you'd put them together into a chunk of material, and then you'd figure out, oh, I want this chunk to go here, this chunk to go here. This one's my most solid one, so I'm going to end with this. This one's a good introduction one, so I'm going to start with this. And it was very intuitive how you should structure the show and how you do this material and work on this material and what order it should be. That's hard to do with a musical show, is I have musical pieces that are all alike, so I'm like, I put them together. But trying to figure out the order of doing these kind of musical chunks was definitely something to get my head around and something I had to kind of workshop alone in the flat to try to see, does this one flow into this? No, and then very trial and error figure out the structure. So they both kind of had their challenges, but it was a lot of challenges going from stand up to music in both my own mentality performing and writing and structuring the show.
Do you have any funny gig horror stories where things just go horribly wrong?
Yes, I I have one, and I have the worst time I've ever bombed. And I love the story because it is the perfect storm of things that could go wrong for a stand-up set. So this was my first set after the first COVID lockdown. So it was just a chunk of time that people were home. People were only starting to go out in public again. And then I was like, I'll sign up for this open mic. I've got some new material that I kind of want to work on that I've written. So it was an open mic in this kind of small bar in Wellington that sometimes can be a really fun show because it's a very intimate vibe, and they normally put it in this kind of back room. So you have the audience sitting together, the comedian on kind of the same level, and it can be a very kind of connection with the audience kind of open mic to do. But they instead put the comic on the complete opposite side of the bar in like this kind of long section of it. And the audience was sitting in this long table away from where I was on stage. Kind of imagine either a conference room or a meeting room, that kind of vibe. So it was already weird. It was in a different space. It was the first show after the lockdown, and then I was on first. So they had the MC doing what I could only describe as their best, and then brought me up, and I was like, okay, I know people aren't used to kind of comedy shows, have been in for a bit. I'll do jokes that I know hit. There are jokes that I always know get like a really good response, and those died on their ass. And then I was like, oh no, I have new material to run. And the jokes that I know do well haven't. Let's try. I did them maybe like the first joke of the kind of new material, which of course died on its ass. And then I remember this is the only time I've bailed on a set. This is the only time I've been like, nope, I'm not doing, nothing's going well. I just got really pissed off, and I said, uh, that's it for me. I see you guys hopefully never again. And then that got a laugh, and I'm like, God dang it. So there was there was some way I should have just been mean to the audience the whole time because that's apparently what they laughed at. And then, yeah, I remember having to go outside of the venue, get some air, just cool down, just pace for a bit because it was just such a rough experience of going through this kind of horrible bum. And it's only afterwards that I can kind of laugh at the amount of things that went wrong to get to that point. Was actually pretty funny.
Where can people follow you?
So again, you can try to find me in the shotgun approach. So the best place is my Facebook page, which is Severin Gourley Comedy Person on Facebook. That's where I post all of my gig stuff, the things that I'm going to be doing. This is when I have friends, family who are like, "Oh man, we want to see you perform. We should go to one of your shows." I go, like my Facebook page. That is where I will tell you where I am. I'm fairly unorganized, or I have to bring up the calendar app to actually know what shows I'm doing. So yeah, like my Facebook page. Yeah, I'm also on TikTok. I think it's called like Severin Comedy because Comedy Person was like way too long and they just booted it out. And so yeah, I'll be hopefully posting a few things there. That's kind of my New Year's resolution is to post more on different forms of social media. And yeah, it would be great to have people come along to some of my shows. Again, I'm doing a 3-night run of Music from an Alternate Universe in the Wellington Fringe, the 28th, 29th of February, and the 1st of March, 7 p.m. at Power Room. So that's going to be the huge thing. And yeah, just doing a few more sets around Wellington. So support your boy, support New Zealand comedy as a whole. It's always great to have an audience that comes along to shows and is good and wants to laugh. So yeah, support comedy in general is the best thing I could say.
I would like to thank Severin for the interview. People watching can like, comment, share, subscribe and whatever else people do to videos if you're watching in the future.